Good evening, foolish mortals. With all this talk of the Olympics, I thought, let me talk about active ghosts. Yes, you heard me correctly. Active ghosts. I'm talking about poltergeists.
They're here.
What is a poltergeist, you say? A ghost or other supernatural being supposedly responsible for physical disturbances, such as loud noises and objects thrown around. That's the Google definition anyway. We are going to talk about a story that took place in Indianapolis, the Indianapolis Poltergeist. Now, this story takes place in a home on North Delaware Street. Okay, well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give the address. Let's respect people's privacy, because I believe today there's new people living there, obviously, and I don't even know if they're aware of what took place here. But anywho, this took place in 1962. Where in this residence where three women were living together, or three women were residing together. Now, the first woman was Renee Beck, 31 years old. She was the head of the household. She had just gone through a divorce and had moved her daughter and her mother into this home with her. Now, her daughter was Linda Beck, who was 13 years old, and her mother was Mrs. Gamecki. And her name was Lena, not to be confused with Linda, the 13-year-old. So I'm going to refer to the 61-year-old lady as Mrs. Gamecki, and she's Renee's mother. Whoa, I just confused myself. So there's three women. So these three women were residing together in this home, but there was some tension. There was tension. There was tension, let me tell you. The neighbors claimed to have heard disagreements, arguments, yelling, screaming on multiple occasions. So a lot of tension, especially with Mrs. Gamecki, the 61-year-old woman. She was born in Germany, and she was not very fond of Americans, okay? She was that kind of woman who just wanted everything done her way. It was her way or the highway. And it upset her to see how her daughter was raising her granddaughter. She disagreed with it. She felt and believed that Linda, 13-year-old Linda, was not being raised properly. And she spoke up about it. Oh, yes, she had a lot to say. And this is why a lot of the discussions and arguments would take place. Now, let's start with when all this started. So on one night, on March 11th, 1962, Mrs. Gamecki, 61-year-old Mrs. Gamecki, and Renee Beck, 31-year-old, were sitting in the kitchen. I'm not sure what they were doing. But they're sitting there, probably talking, probably arguing, right? I don't know. But they're sitting there when suddenly a glass lifts up of its own accord. Okay, no one is lifting it. It just by itself, on its own, it just lifted and crashed against the wall and broke. So they're just sitting there looking at each other like, did you see that? Am I crazy? You saw that, right? What the heck just happened? But they decide, okay, we're not going to pay too much attention to it. Okay, it's just probably, who knows? Sure, there's a logical explanation. And they go about their usual routine. They go to bed. And at 10:30 or approximately 10:37 p.m. that night, they hear this loud crashing sound coming from upstairs from the second floor. So this awakes them. They all run up there, right? What was that? What? And they realize that this German crystal had fallen off of a bookshelf. So like this, it just kind of fell off. But again, very strange, because the sound was very loud, as if almost someone had purposefully thrown it against the floor. But again, they're probably thinking, well, it probably just fell. No big deal. They go back to bed. And again, that night, this poltergeist was on a roll this night. At approximately 11 p.m., an ashtray, again, kind of levitated or lifted, if it floated, I don't know, of its own accord, and smashed against the wall. So now they're sitting there thinking, okay, no, something's up. This is weird. This is strange. This is unusual. They're naturally scared. So they decide, you know what? We're heading out. We're leaving. We're going to check into a hotel for the night because this is weird. Okay. So they check into a hotel and they come back the next morning, And, they've probably calmed down, they've relaxed, they're probably thinking, oh, it was probably just our imagination. I'm sure there's nothing to worry about. Things are fine. They go about their usual routine, but the phenomena starts picking up and happening rather quickly again. This time, they were in the kitchen. I don't know what this ghost has against the kitchen, this poltergeist, but everything seems to be revolving around the kitchen. So this poltergeist, allegedly, lifted a hot cup of coffee this time. Hot cup of coffee, and it zooms past Mrs. Gamecki's head, the 61-year-old. It misses her by just a teeny bit. So now they're concerned. They're saying, whoa, no, that was dangerous. Imagine that would have actually hit her. It would have burned her. It would have injured her. Like, that's it. No, that's where we draw the line. And so they say, what do we do, though? So what do they do? What would you do? I don't know. What do you do in a situation like that? They call the police. 911. I don't know. I can't imagine how that call went. Hey, there's ish flying around my house. What do I do? So the police go to the house. But I mean, what can the police really do, right? So what they end up doing is they just kind of walk around to inspect the home, make sure no one's there. And while the police were there, they did hear things breaking and crashing. They didn't see anything like float of its own accord or lift up on its own or anything, but they did hear the sounds of things breaking and crashing. So that was that. They thought it was odd, but then they went home. There's nothing they could really do. Not home, but they left, because what could they really do? They can't like arrest Casper, right? You know what I'm saying? These occurrences, this strange phenomena continued happening over the next few weeks, and they kept calling the police because they didn't really know who else to turn to. So they would call the cops. Cops would show up, inspect the home, and again, they couldn't really do much about it though. But on one night, Officer Ray Patton was hit by a glass on his back while walking around and inspecting the home. This glass hit him on the back so hard, in fact, that it left a bruise. And it was said that this breaking of glass, breaking of plates, breaking of crystals, all this stuff, whatever they have that's breakable, it got so bad that it would be to the point where when the police were called and they were in the home, the floor would literally be covered in glass from the dishes, the glasses, the mirrors even. So can you imagine this ghost just has some anger issues? I don't know. So the ghost is just like bass, like just one after the other. And you could even see dents on the furniture, the wood from, when the objects would strike it or had struck it. So you could see the damage that it caused or it had caused. And then obviously, because word of mouth, words start getting out about what was going on in this home, that some paranormal investigators were even drawn to visiting the home. They wanted to investigate to see what was going on. And there was one paranormal investigator who, whilst in the home, was also hit with a glass. Now, on another occasion, Mrs. Gamecki's, the 61-year-old, her purse went missing. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. It was there one second, gone the next. They looked for it everywhere and could not find it. And then suddenly, one day, out of nowhere, it was just randomly there. Where'd it come from? Who put it here? I don't know. Now, her purse originally had $125. And when they found it again, it only had $35. So not only is this poltergeist causing significant damage to their property, but this poltergeist is also a thief, apparently. The struggle is real out here. Don't tell me I still need money in the afterlife. Now, one of the more severe things or scarier, well, I mean, that's already scary, but one of the more serious things that started happening or occurring was that the women started waking up with bite marks on their bodies. They would have bite marks with no explanation and bruises, but bite marks on their arms, on their necks, on their throats. And a doctor examined these bite marks and said they appeared to be coming from a bat. What in the vampire? Either that or Batman, what the heck? It was also said that 13-year-old Linda was the one who would have more bruises and bites on her body, or at least more than her grandmother and her mother. On one occasion, a police psychologist named Francis Francis spent 90 minutes with the three women in the home, in the residence. So about an hour and a half, right? Now, during Francis's visit to the home, Francis did witness or hear glass breaking, things like that, or glass being thrown, but this would only happen when one of the women were not in the room with Francis at the time. So Francis decides to, have a little experiment, and says, hey, none of you leave my sight. The three of you, I want you here in this room right now, sitting where I can see you. Nobody move, and we're gonna see if something happens while you're all in the same room with me. I can just picture the officer and while they were all in the room and Francis was there, and nothing happened. Wah, wah, wah. So those are some of the things that occurred in this residence. But wait, here we go. You ready for this? On March 26th, a police officer who was called again to the residence claimed to have witnessed Mrs. Gamecki, 61-year-old Mrs. Gamecki, throw a glass against the wall and kick over a piano stool. Mrs. Gamecki. She was arrested and charged on disorderly conduct, and she even spent the night in jail. Oh yes, they didn't care. She was 61. They just said, hey, this is disorderly conduct, and away you go. So they locked her up. 61 years old, they locked her up. She spent the night in jail. And at her hearing, the judge told her he would waive a psychiatric examination and release her on one condition. Now, that condition was if she agreed to go back to Germany within the next 10 days, which she did. She accepted, she did it. She left. And after she left, guess what? There were no more occurrences. Nothing else happened. So everyone, the police, the judges, everyone just came to the conclusion that it was Mrs. Gamecki, that she was the quote-unquote poltergeist all along. Now, there were other witnesses to these incidents, and they all said there's no way that Mrs. Gamecki was responsible because A, she's 61, and some of these items would be thrown with such force that they felt she how do I say this? How do I word this? Well, she was 61. It would have been very difficult and challenging for a 61-year-old woman to throw things with such force, right? So what do you guys think? Was she the poltergeist? Does this Mrs. Gamecki have some anger issues, or what? Or was this really a ghost? Or maybe the poltergeist didn't like Mrs. Gamecki. I don't know. So what do you guys think? Was this a poltergeist? Or were these ladies just attacking each other and throwing glasses at each other and blaming it on a ghost or on a poltergeist? And I think the lesson of this video is don't upset a woman. Ladies, have you ever thrown a plate when you're upset? I have never. If I'm ever a poltergeist, you're just gonna see like wine bottles floating around, tequila bottles, shot glasses, shot. Okay, well, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you guys. I hope to see you in the next video. Okay, good night.